Yesterday, we saw an article that established the conversations that had been had over the last couple of weeks in terms of what's going to be done. And to help us into that conversation this morning, before we tell you a little bit more about what that is, Victor Ndede is a technology and human rights manager with Amnesty International Kenya, and he is in the hot seat this morning. Victor, good morning.
Good morning, Du.
How are you doing?
Very well. How about you?
Very well, thank you. We admire your dedication. We hear that you got up very early this morning and you were on a plane and you were in the hot seat this morning.
Yes,
you
the
did.
Conversation is as important.
I love to hear it. I absolutely do. And that you're here on time. There are many a folk who could learn a lesson or two from you, but thank you for being here. We're looking into surveillance or service, the push to assign meter numbers to internet users in Kenya. We'll look into what a meter actually does and what it would do on the internet in just a minute. But we want to take you to Ghana for a minute, and we can see that you're dressed for the part, so yay.
Yes.
Our proverbs that we usually take every week, we go to a different African continent. We're in Ghana this week. Mark is going to share the proverb with you, and then we would like to hear your interpretation of the same.
Yes. But I hope that meter is a meter they're giving all of us. Yani 1 mila.
One can only wish.
1 mila. One internet user, 1 mila. That's a good campaign promise. Anyway, moving to Ghana. Right. A child who asks questions does not become a fool. I repeat, a child who asks questions does not become a fool.
So my interpretation of it.
Yes, yes, please.
I mean, anyone who asks is eager to learn and is eager to gain knowledge. And I believe knowledge drives away foolishness. And in that sense, that proverb is very justified, that seek, learn, and when you learn, you do away with foolishness or do away with ignorance. And so, yeah, valid.
Uliza swali. Tuanze na ndu.
Okay, so these are the conversations that we're having this morning, obviously asking questions and seeing exactly what is happening. So internet surveillance is a growing concern in the country. We're looking at the events of over the last 1 year or so, where there has been increased surveillance in terms of where people are on the internet, what they are doing, whom they are conversing with, the messages that they're spreading. We know that there's been accusations left, right and center that the internet has been, not just accusations, but I mean, it's the reality that oftentimes the internet has been used to spread false information. That has happened. We take that. But now what we are looking at is that there is a bill before our legislators that essentially will see that there will be meters digital meters essentially put in that would find out where you are on the internet, for how long, who you're talking to, and what messages you're putting out there. It's surveillance. However you want to look at it, it's surveillance. And if it were to pass this bill, that there would be unfettered access to you, me, everybody who gets on the internet and what exactly you do day or night. What's the problem?
Yeah, I think this bill is quite problematic in the sense that, you don't look at it, and as you rightly put it, it's important that we look at it in the ecosystem that it comes in. It's coming on the back of a lot of calls for social media regulation, from the Interior PS to the Kotu SecGen to the Interior CS. Virtually everyone in government has called for social media regulation. And in us reading this bill, you actually see that the intent is actually to surveil. And yesterday night I was on show with the author of the bill, and she alluded other things that were the intention of the bill, which clearly from you reading and everyone reading, the intention of that bill is to essentially know what Kenyans are doing on the internet. If you say you want a digital meter, so look at this bill in this sense. It's proposing a billing system. The system has a unique meter number for each unique customer. Then the system is designed to monitor customer usage. The customer usage in that bill has not been defined. So what is the usage? What customer usage would you be looking at? The third thing is that this customer usage is then converted into readable details that can be shared with the Communications Authority, which is a state agency. And so if you look at the internet, and how it works. When you say customer usage, essentially you're saying, I'm able to see perhaps what websites, what applications you're using.
Yes.
And all this data then is then transmitted to the Communications Authority. And the objects or the reasons that have been stated in the bill is to see to it that Kenyans get value for the data they use. But if you look at the length and breadth of the data they need or the bill is proposing to collect, it actually goes way over and above what is necessary for billing purposes. And so in effect, the broadness of it, the vagueness of it is by design, and if we give it a proper interpretation, it's actually unconstitutional. Yeah.
So, if you look at what the bill proposes, especially for ISPs, is for ISPs to be able to get all that data and once every financial year give it to Communications Authority of Kenya, which is a government agency.
Yeah.
And when you talk about a billing mechanism or a metering way of doing the same, a layman Kenyan, I was having a discussion with someone yesterday, and they would say, even if I'm buying data, even if for a GB for 1 hour, it is still a metering way. It is still a way that I'm paying for my data. So there is no need for government to come and regulate how I am paying for it. And here you say that you termed the proposed law as an invasive and extensive data collection and surveillance of citizens. Why would you say that?
It's a massive data collection exercise, because remember, you are assigning a unique meter to each customer. I can't quite remember the stats right, but we have way over 30-something million mobile subscribers, most of which are internet users. And so you can imagine, and what actually the bill says is at least once a year this data is shared with the CA. It doesn't mean that they cannot request for it every other week. The wording there is at least once a year. And so what we are saying here is that data or internet usage data on 38 million Kenyans will be in the custody of a government agency. ISPs will be mandated to collect this data, and it's on 38 million people.
Okay.
I mean,
my question is much simpler than that.
Yeah.
Because I'm listening to you, and I'm sure many people listening to you are also wondering, what the heck are you talking about? So let's start here.
Yeah.
One, when I go to the internet, I have a phone number, for example. At home, I have a router number. I have a specific, what's that thing called? I forget. ISP. That knows who I am. And this information is not exactly hidden from the government.
Yeah.
And two, my information. So I'm thinking websites I visit, this is not hard to know, right? Because see, that's how they investigate.
Essentially,
people.
they know it anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I am sitting here, I'm trying to think, okay, what new information is this that is being sought that is not necessarily available if I do a crime and I am arrested? They're able even to go through my previous Google searches and they find out how to hide a Nigerian body because me and do had a thief. You understand?
Yeah.
They can do all those things. So what is this that they're trying to find that they already can't find?
Yeah, I think, Mark, your question is actually where we always start when reviewing legislation.
Yes.
You ask yourself, what mischief is being cured by this legislation? Yes. What are they aiming at?
Yes.
And when you look at whatever you've described as government can still get this info if they wanted to, there's actually a law through which they do that.
Yes.
But you see here, this bill is proposing an indiscriminate mass surveillance of the same data. So you don't need to be a person of interest in a criminal investigation or any investigation for that matter for your data to be accessed, because ordinarily they would have to get a court order to start investigating your devices, intercept your communication. That is what is there by law. Yes. In practice, maybe up for debate. But in this scenario, what you're looking at is a system where indiscriminately you have data on 38 million Kenyans. And so someone sitting somewhere with whichever dashboard would be able to actually look at Mark Bichachi for 2025. His most visited website was X, or his data traffic was largely on X.
Yes, it was X. Yes.
So, so that you don't create what the scenario it then creates is that, and what is worrisome from a human rights perspective, you can't have indiscriminate mass surveillance.
Okay.
Nobody is comfortable, and I mean the chilling effect that it creates, because you can imagine if you sit today, knowing that all your internet traffic is being collected, stored, and shared with the government of Kenya, I don't think you'd go to some websites you go to.
Like X for Mark. But the question would be, to what end? And I think that's what we're trying to get there, because it seems like we know the answer. We know what it is that there seems to want to be a situation whereby a level of control then is established.
Yeah.
So it's the strategies that you talked about, that if you want to find out what somebody's doing, the law requires that you go and get a court order and that you must go through all of these steps. But then it would seem as though those steps is what they're trying to cut out.
Yeah.
Because then I have access to everything. I don't need to talk to someone else later to find out if I can check Aseto's and see if he's planning something or some kind of insurrection.
Yeah.
You see, so it's cutting out all of these processes that the law requires that you do. By having this bill in place, it is just established and it's agreed across board that, you know what, we can check all of these things and we can do with it whatever we please thereafter.
Yeah. I think what actually we are looking at, the devil in the details here is in how it has been drafted.
Yeah.
You know, it's very vague and it's subject to very broad interpretations. Because if someone says monitor customer usage,
Yes. What does that mean?
what does that mean? You know, how do you define usage? Because in the context of internet, someone would, and what Honorable Keitany was saying yesterday is that you need to get a meter and that bills based on your consumption, so that you're able to track, trace how your data has been used, which ideally is a nice idea in consumer protection. But how this bill is drafted, this is just a Trojan horse.
Indeed.
Yeah, just lie to us, get us in line, and then once the bill is passed, then we realize, we actually allow these guys to monitor.
So how does it
customers.
marry then with the Office of Data Protection, whereby your privacy essentially is guaranteed, should be guaranteed, because the setting up of that office almost guaranteed just that. It's the same reason why you can't take pictures of my children wantonly wherever you are. You cannot take pictures of Mark and then go post them on X magazine as you would like without his permission.
Yeah.
So how does that marry in with this particular office, which was set up to do the very same thing that it seems that this bill is trying to remove?
You see, and this is where we have an issue with it.
Yeah.
You see, when you look at the Kenyan Constitution, it provides for the right to privacy under Article 31. When you read Article 31D, it talks about you have the right not to have the privacy of your communications infringed.
Yes.
Then the Data Protection Act actually came to give effect to these two constitutions, Article 31C and D. So when you look at the Data Protection Act, it has principles around purpose limitation, where data can only be collected for one purpose, and then you cannot repurpose it for other things. And then there's also the principle around data minimization. But you see here we have an overly broad and vague law that says just collect customer usage, which then defeats the purpose of defeats the principle of purpose limitation. Because for me, the data that I use and whatever that the bill is proposing goes way and over and above the purposes of billing. And then there's the data minimization issue. Why do you need to have 38 million people's data? And then there's a question you asked around what is the aim? You see, with a meter means one of two things. You know, the way if you didn't pay, you get your meter,
You can lock it.
blocked, or someone actually disconnects the meter and you have to repay for connection. So that means that the effect that could come at some point, and of course perhaps just reading into the bill further, it would mean that the Communications Authority or the government could actually make an order that a certain meter be switched off.
If you keep checking things like how to build a bomb, they can now come and decide we are worried because now we can shut this thing down.
The level of intrusion here is quite scary, right? Because first, of course, there's the fear that you wake up one day and your internet connection is gone. That is a fear. But then there's also the fear of how granular this data could go.
Yes.
Because it's one thing to know that I go to x.com, right? It's another thing to know that I follow Aseto and Jane and Tom. And then it's another thing to know what I actually say between me and Aseto, and then make a conclusion of my isn't that what the Chinese do in that social grade system of theirs that they have.
Yeah, and if I can connect, if you allow me to just connect that, there's a book called 1984 written by George Orwell. The central message of this book was how governments go towards totalitarianism and authoritarianism, whereby essentially what you do is that you make sure you put in all kinds of controls. You control how they think, you control how they speak, you control essentially how you think, and then you destroy the human spirit. George Orwell wrote the book in Europe, not here. But we can see that this is how this is how the characterization that he makes very clear in this book. We can't run away from the things that we're actually seeing now that is a current day manifestation of the things that he wrote in that book. Are we not hurtling very quickly to a place whereby if there are meters and controls in almost everything that we do,
and they can know what I'm saying,
and they know what I'm saying and what I'm thinking, essentially we are going towards authoritarianism, are we not?
I think let me also bring another perspective. I mean, because as an organization, as Amnesty, we've of course worked in this space for quite a bit. You know, in 2019, we had an almost similar proposed amendment. It was the Kenya Information and Communication Act Amendment Bill of 2019. It was proposed by now late Honorable Ijendi. What that bill proposed was we needed to have social media regulation. And they said we need to register all bloggers in Kenya. But when you went and read on what a blogger was defined as, was basically anyone on social media. If you put up a post on your Facebook, you're defined as a blogger. And so then it meant that you'd have to be registered with the regulator. Which would also mean that it would attract some fees. It would then attract some certain sanctions if you don't go through what or the code of conduct that they propose to have. They'd even placed obligations on WhatsApp group administrators in that bill. That bill proceeded all the way to the committee stage. Guys fought so hard, at least the then Committee on Communication at the National Assembly, so it fit to drop that bill. But if you look at the context, and that's why I'm saying, for us, we look at this thing in an ecosystem of things. Everything is building up to something. And normally it's attacked from many laws. Because even in the current finance bill, KRA is seeking waivers. Is like, let's delete the clause that protects citizens' personal data from being integrated with the tax system. And the question there still is, why would you need all this data in the hands of businesses for you to do your tax administration? There are far less intrusive ways to do this. And that's what we're even saying with this bill. Whatever intention they have on ensuring that people get value for money for the data bundles they purchase, there are better ways and less intrusive ways of getting to that end.
So when you look at the bill in place now, there are a few things that have picked up. So there is the unique number. The unique number then would grant you access to the internet, right? And then we have the meter within which now you get to do your business and whatnot, right? Now we have the readable data as well, which is being shared by CAK. And one would argue all these is so that the government gets an opportunity, an open door to do as it wishes, in the sense that through the readable number, they're able to come up with a conclusion about you and what it is you do on social media and decide whether to revoke that meter number that grants you access or not. And these will then go forward to make a decision on the kind of communication that the government wants to happen on the interweb. Is that so?
Yeah, quite correct. Because you see, once you assign someone a meter number and you're saying it's a unique meter number, it's assigned based on a unique identifier. And the single most unique identifier we have as Kenyans is your ID number. And so then it means that ID number that you have and will be what will be used to assign a meter number. And so you can then imagine that everything you do now, because if your phone already is a meter, assuming you have a meter on your phone, it's assigned to an ID number. So every traffic that passes through that meter number will be assigned to you. So you can think about the implications for people who provide Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fis. So Standard Group here, you have a Wi-Fi maybe for staff. Standard Group is the registered owner of that meter number. Someone does nefarious things on that system or that Wi-Fi, then you'd clearly see a scenario where this liability will actually be apportioned to Standard Group because they own the meter number. Or it would be easy to just say, you guys, let's shut down your meter number as we figure out things. That is the chilling effect when you read this bill.
You know, let me tell you, and let's make it very organic. You know, people are saying about nefarious things and things like that. You just think about your communication with your grandmother, your mother, your father, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your sister, your cousin, and all the things that you say.
It's
right? Being able to be monitored in any way. It is scary to know that someone sitting in a government organization can sit down, look at your meter number, and download your conversations. That is scary. You know, let me give you this story. Do you know that this surveillance system that the United States had after 9/11, how many times did they confess that they were accessing people's nudes? They actually had a score system for people's nudes. In that, I forget what it's called, the monitoring thing that they did in the States. That means someone, some Otieno, some John, some Kamau, some whatever, can be sitting somewhere and going through your private information, data, and whatever, and ranking you.
And you see, the saddest part about it, when you talk about internet, is internet as well is attached to GPS systems and whatnot. Because I look at what it is you're saying here. When you have a unique and identifiable meter number for each individual, then ideally you create a trail for this person. And if at all it was just metering and saying this person used 10 gigabytes, the other details they do not need.
Yeah. But even when I later reflected further on this, I was quite clear that this metering thing is just dangerous. Even if you're looking at just metering or determining how much data someone used, because if your phone right now, most of our phones can show us how much data we are using, either an Android or an Apple device. The particulars of which tell you which applications and which platforms you use the most. When you read the bill, it talks about monitor customer usage. For you to know any usage, or if someone was to tell me that you actually use 50 GB, they would actually come and tell me, you spent an hour on X, you watched this number of videos or this quantity of videos. That is the usage data that populates your gigabytes of data. And so it means at no point will this customer usage say, or data that is transmitted will just be this person used 50 GB of data. It will have to break down the details for you.
Of what exactly?
Of what for you. So you can imagine you have all these websites you visited in a report or in an invoice, because part of the system is generating an invoice. So your invoice is reading you spent X number of minutes on or hours or GBs on certain things that I may not want to mention on radio. You know, all that data will be there. And so the big thing here from a human rights perspective is the chilling effect on free expression.
Sure.
Because you see, when you look at free expression, we are told you have the right to seek, receive, and impart information, ideas, you have artistic creativity there, you have research there. So you can imagine all these things involve you getting on the internet to seek information, to receive information, to impart ideas, to research,
educate, entertain.
Yeah. So all this data, because the law has not defined what this customer usage is, all this data, someone could define it at some point. You can imagine if you get this as an act of parliament and tomorrow someone decides usage data will go into the specific websites you visited and all that to generate an invoice. And so that's what we are worried about.
Okay, we'll take a break and then we'll come back and look at really actually then what privacy means when the office of the data commissioner then was set up, because I mean it's not really an old office, right? It's still pretty new. So what was it envisaged to actually guarantee, and how would this then undermine what that mandate actually was? And so Kenyans are obviously feeling, look, we have a certain element, a right of that expression and of that privacy. How does this counter? Technology and Human Rights Manager with Amnesty International is Victor Ndede. He is in the hot seat this morning, and we're looking at surveillance or service, the push to assign meter numbers to internet users in Kenya, depending on what it is and who. Remember who passes bills, and we also know where they hang out. So the likelihood of this passing is also something that's then taken into consideration. However, this put against the rights that Kenyans have towards their own privacy, and what this essentially would mean. How do we play that with an office that was set up to guarantee the rights to this privacy?
And thanks very much for that, because when you look at the establishment of the Data Commissioner's Office, or the Data Protection Commissioner's Office, it's established by the Act, the Data Protection Act, and it was a long walk to get to that law. And because of the realization that the Constitution had provided some promises that you and primarily that information relating to you, your family, and your private affairs should not be unnecessarily revealed or required. That is Article 31C and Article 31D on the privacy of your communications not being infringed. The Data Protection Act actually was enacted to give life to these two sabbaticals of the Constitution. And so then you look at the Data Commissioner's Office or the Data Protection Commissioner's Office as an enforcer of these two rights. They are trying to ensure, their work is to ensure that personal information is not unnecessarily revealed or required, and privacy of communications is not infringed in the enforcement of this law. And if you look at what this bill is providing, and just as I shared earlier, this is massive amounts of data collection. You can imagine all the internet users. Most of us have 2 or 3 devices, which would mean a license for each of, or a meter for each of those devices. So the numbers could even go up to maybe 40 million unique internet subscriptions. And all this data being collected, the law is already saying, please do not collect more than what you need as a principle in the Data Protection Act. Collect only that which you need. Collect what is adequate, what is relevant. If you look at this, the reading of this bill, it's collecting more than, the intention would be to collect more than is necessary for billing. And so it would erode and draw back all the gains we've made in creating a privacy culture in Kenya. And this is quite concerning because a lot of work has gone into getting that Data Protection Act in place, the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner in place, and then we start clawing back on some of these promises that the Constitution made and the Data Protection Act actually enacted. And that's something that we have to be concerned about.
You see, when you talked about the Office of the Data Protection Agency, there is the question that now all this data will be given to CAK and they will be the ones to stay and store this data. How they will do it is not clear. How they will use it is not clear. Just how dangerous is that? Because then you see these will be bypassing the Office of Data Protection on what role they should do.
Yeah, I mean, in reading of the bill, of course, there's lack of clear oversight on what exactly or who exactly oversights this data sharing. Of course, they'll say CA is oversighted by a board, which it has, and Parliament. But this is a very operational thing that people would ask, how do you oversight this? But the main thing to note, even before we get there, Sito, is in the act in itself of collecting data points on 38 million people just to generate invoices and bills on their usage is already an excessive data collection exercise, which would already be afoul of the law and even the Constitution itself. Because this bill, if you read it in the way it's been drafted, it's actually a bill that is proposing to limit the right to privacy.
Yeah.
And so for a law to limit a right, it has to meet a certain criteria. It has to be necessary, it has to be proportionate, and it has to pursue a legitimate aim. This law does not do any of those 3 things.
Just a quick question. Does this law say that once this data is collected and it's given to the Communication Authority, what the Communication Authority can and can't do with that data? Does it say?
No, it's silent. And so then it would mean that everything else that is within the powers and functions of the Communications Authority would then be applied to the data that is collected under this amendment bill, should it become an act. Yes. So everything else would apply.
So basically, you become property. Your data becomes property without limit to the Communication Authority and all its functions.
Yes.
One of which, by the way, is to switch off SpiceFM, should they choose so.
I wouldn't say that out loud, but okay.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Yeah. You see, if your data is given to the authority, and the authority has the ability to switch off certain stations, right? It means that then your own device being given to them, and then it does not meet the requirements of what they want done, then they can do what they do to every other.
Yeah, I mean, that was the point where I was making, that if you issue a meter number, then impliedly you can actually withdraw the meter.
Yes.
The meter number. And so it would mean effectively, if, say, for example, a telco refuses to assign you a meter number, you cannot access the internet.
Right.
And that already is problematic, because it creates an access issue.
Yeah.
If they get an instruction to withdraw your meter number, they will effect that instruction based on whatever customer usage data has been seen. And so what we're saying is that this bill is just a Trojan horse. Once it is enacted, a whole world of surveillance opportunities opens up to the state. The other thing to note also is, imagine an ISP with all this data, government with all this data.
Yes.
This data is so rich from advertising agencies, digital markets. Yes. So they'll be attacked for someone to get this data. And in fact, that's why in the article yesterday, I talked about the cybersecurity implication of this. Because I would imagine for any big tech, because that's their big business, advertising, this data would be like a treasure trove.
Absolutely.
You know, like, I already know what this guy likes, which websites they visit. I mean, I can target you with advertisement because I already have clarity on how you operate on the internet. And so who will work to protect this data? We have had significant attacks on certain government systems. Yes. BRS recently had an attack, and we had a lot of that data on who owns companies or the beneficial ownership data to the level of beneficial ownership data shared with on the dark web. Yes. I think a year ago we had the denial of service attack on eCitizen, and nobody has come back to us and told us this is how things went. This is either what was taken. This is what remedies we have put in because of how obscure some of these things are. And so now you can imagine another database with 38 million people's internet usage. And remember, this data is collected, I mean, the bill says at least once a year, but the CA could actually collect it more than once a year if it chooses to, because the minimum threshold has already been set. No maximum threshold has been set on access.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's no law in terms of how long this data is kept, because there's also supposed to be, if you're keeping my data, you're keeping it for how long?
Yeah, so I mean, the Data Protection Act provides that, of course, data cannot be kept in perpetuity. You have a right to be forgotten. Yes. And they have to delete that data at some point. But of course, the bill is not clear on whether and how this data should be kept, for how long. And those are things that I think would be defined by statute rather than regulations that would come later, so that we are clear that if this thing comes to pass, then if data is collected on my internet usage, someone cannot stay with it timeless.
So, beyond looking at cutting out what the demands of the law are in terms of what then you can retrieve from somebody, we're looking at this bill. I don't see that it provides anything more than what is already currently available for them to do. If they wanted to find out what you were doing, they could today. What this bill, the only thing that I see is that it cuts out the whole thing of having to go down, getting a court order, wait for this, the other thing. It just opens the door. Is it possible, as other jurisdictions do, that we often compare ourselves to, that you can create a balance between the offerings of technology and then any kind of information control that a state would then want to establish? Is it possible to have a good relationship between the two?
It's a complex one. And let me just go back to something you've alluded to. What new thing are they trying to do? Because you see, Kenya already has mandatory SIM registration. For you to get a SIM card, you have to provide an ID, a passport, an alien card for everyone. I mean, from you as a citizen, a tourist visiting produces a passport, refugees produce a refugee card. So everyone, SIM cards are already mandatorily registered. And SIM cards are probably they account for the highest percentage of people on how people access the internet. Even if you look at home fibers and stuff, they're still linked to a certain SIM card that you used to make the request and used to actually pay. And so when when you look at a bill that now tries to reinvent this, and I've tried checking across the globe, I've not seen such a system anywhere else in the world where there's a meter number and a unique meter for internet usage. And of course, yesterday, the Honorable Member likened it to an electricity meter token, the prepaid token system. And the question was, it was a difficult conversation, but
because when you talk about a meter number, Kenya Power never comes to tell you that your fridge uses X amount of power or whatever. But they
or use this amount of power on things that vibrate in your house.
Exactly. It is all about, this bill wants to go deeper and open the floodgates to authorities to use your data as they wish.
Yeah, it's. There are two effects of this thing. There's of course the massive collection of data.
Yes.
The second one is just the chilling effect.
Yeah.
Do you know, like, the moment this thing passes, nobody will use the internet the same way they use it right now.
Yes.
Because I'll be like, I think these guys are monitoring my traffic. It's like you having your browser on a billboard and how you're using your phone just being on a billboard. Someone seeing your thoughts, someone seeing what you're researching. Think about it like people who have perhaps researching on a medical condition, researching on a holiday. All this information someone would have access to. And the problem that is created there is you start getting people self-censoring themselves. Because you are worried that if whatever I'm researching, whatever I'm sharing with my friends and colleagues is shared with the state, then certain things would follow me.
That means the bill, if you look at it deeply, goes in to curtail on the freedom of information and access to that.
Yes, because you see, when you have a right to access information, and on the other side, someone is saying, I have access to all the information you're trying to access. Then you're left with the question, should I proceed or not?
Let me just ask a question, because people are asking, this is about cyberbullying, it's about online criminality and things like that. Now, we've said this before, and let me repeat for their benefit, that number one, there is cures already in the law. If you're cyberbullied, correct?
Yeah.
They can investigate.
Yes.
If there's criminal activity happening online, they are able to access all those systems and still investigate, correct?
Yes.
So this bill is not curing anything criminal.
Yeah, and I mean, already the constitution of this country provides for what would be limitations to freedom of expression.
Yes.
Advocacy for hatred, hate speech,
Yes.
Incitement to violence. Those are already provided in law.
Yes.
When you look, and the government enacted in 2018 the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act,
Yes.
provides for a whole list of offences that relate to using of computers or digital systems.
Yes.
So, and when you look at, perhaps if you're, and I even saw those comments yesterday around child sex offenders, there's already a law that looks at those people.
Yes.
But if you say you want to indiscriminately surveil all of us in the guise of looking for a few criminal elements, that's a problem. Unless you're saying all of us are criminals first, and then we prove ourselves innocent.
Or we must ask you then how you can efficiently do your job if you must put everybody into the basket and then weed them out. Your job requires that you should be succinct in your,
in your pursuit of
you should be able to zero in on. You can't now say throw everybody into the net and then thereafter start to pick out the fish. I mean, for goodness sake, we're not fishermen here. You should be able to do it with better accuracy. That's why you're there.
Yeah, and even just the amount of work they're trying to load onto themselves. Like, how would you even humanly look at 38 million people's invoices?
Yeah.
How? And even and you see, then it would mean that perhaps at some point they want to apply artificial intelligence to this. So imagine again AI systems picking up on your usage data. And someone because first someone will have to train it with your usage data.
Okay. I just had a eureka moment. Perhaps we're looking at something that is the result of somebody saying, what is it that I can actually do that would leave a legacy on my position in this particular office? So perhaps we can ask the question, when we look at Kenya's technological journey, and the things that are happening in this space, what is actually lacking that perhaps we can pay some attention to, that those things can actually be done? Are there things perhaps that need to be done in Kenya's tech space?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of things that can be done, and I mean
that we can waste some, not waste, that we can apply some energy
to. I mean, there are things that people are asking for, like, and all these processes around AI and its regulation. We have data policies, cloud policies. There are more useful things to do in that space, and whatever the honorable member ideally explained yesterday, because the concern there is about the expiry of bundles after someone purchases. And we are like, it's an important issue, yes. It's a consumer protection issue, yes. But we are not reading it in the bill you have put forth.
It's not there.
Yeah, it's not there. What you're saying and what the bill is saying are two different things.
Yeah.
And so the advice was, withdraw this bill, go rewrite whatever you're saying in the language that would fit consumer protection, and then bring it back. But in the current form, whatever you're saying around people getting value for the bundles they need, saying that people buying bundles for 1 hour and then they expire without them using, it's all a market thing. There's an expiry of bundles. There are bundles that, and I mean, the less money you spend, of course, you get higher bundles, but for a shorter period of time. And so it's just how the market is. And further, we told the honorable member, you can't, if sitting in Parliament debating finance bills since 2020, since time immemorial, the same Parliament has sat and passed finance bills and tax bills that have added tax on digital services.
Yeah.
So if your aim is to get most value for money for the youth of Kenya to access the internet, look at the taxes that are put on digital services. Mobile data, call time, all those things attract excise duty.
Yes.
Excise is a sin tax that is levied on alcohol, tobacco,
things that you maybe don't need.
You want to dissuade people from using. And so if digital services attract excise, then it means you're trying to dissuade us from using these digital services. And across the continent, it has been the go-to place for governments to raise more income, revenue, going for digital services, because that's where it's growing. And so if you want to improve the prospects of young people accessing the internet, look at the tax. Yeah. Reduce the tax. Mobile service providers will also definitely meet their side of this deal and reduce the costs of internet. But you cannot use this route to try and tackle that.
But at the same time, when you say that you tax data usage, etc., it also means that as a government, you're incentivized to know that if this guy bought 5 GB, he actually spent 5 GB. So there's already a system to tell that 5 GB has been bought and used.
But now you see what the bill is proposing is for you to know what composes 5 GB.
Yeah.
The website, the downloads, all those things. And that thing is on your invoice.
And you see, this goes even deeper. If you just sit and look in terms of people who work in terms of investigations on the social media, they use pseudonyms. And there will be no pseudo accounts if anyone is an investigative journalist, because then you will be required to have a meter number that is a unique identifier to you. So in anything that you post on social media, on the internet, will directly be linked to you, which then blocks the work that you do.
Yeah, or even your story is just blown before you get anywhere, because I mean, someone already has access to what you're researching on. That data is available. So And one of the things that has been very important in our internet space has been the pseudonymous and anonymous access to the internet and access to social media platforms, because then they allow for whistleblowers to do what they do. They allow for human rights activists to do what they do. And so when you bring in such a law, then all this gets eroded, and then you have a system where everyone knows that whatever they do on the internet is surveilled at will, mass, indiscriminate, and shared with the government.
I often think, and in development circles, many would agree, that the acts of government should, across board, bring about benefit to the country and to its people and to the processes that they engage in. So oftentimes the question must be posed that in this venture that you are, undertaking, what would be the benefit to process? What would be the benefit to people? What would be the benefit to the state? I'm looking in this one for the benefit to any of those three and trying to keep an open mind. Is there a benefit to any of those three?
Yeah. To be honest, I struggle to see what exactly they're curing. It's like someone just putting out a medicine and say, you just swallow, we'll figure out
what it's
somewhere
treating
down the line.
You are sick, just take the meds.
Because I'm sure, looking at, for us as consumers and internet users, we are worried. I would imagine telcos and internet service providers are wondering what would be the cost of actually implementing this proposal.
That huge amount
which
of data.
Cost would definitely, because these businesses are business and at the end of the day they look at their books, would want to transfer that cost to us, the consumer, for running a digital metering system. So they would have an issue. So and the biggest beneficiary, if at all I would call them that in this transaction, is the state, because they would get what they always want: surveillance data. So if this bill is given a wholesome look, it looks like the only person benefiting properly is the state, to the detriment of our fundamental rights and freedoms. And so the best thing that this bill can do, or the move of this bill can do at this point, just withdraw it, go rewrite the consumer protection way, and bring it back for debate.
But even then, how much consumer protection really is there needed? Because first and foremost, you already tax this thing, and therefore you have a way of measuring what data is being bought and used. It's already measured, right? And therefore the consumer protections you have to have are very basic. That if I bought 5 GB, let me be given 5 GB and I use 5 GB, which I can determine for myself on my phone because it tells me when I use 5 GB in a day. So what protection is this that we need, and who has been harassing me anyway?
But that's what I'm saying. I don't even think it's needed.
Yes.
But I can tell you now, if you just give me 5 seconds, I can list 50 things that are needed in this country for which this sweat and effort to do this thing and these resources that we put behind it can actually go to and actually sort out.
Yes.
I think we are now trapped in another situation whereby somebody's sitting somewhere and saying, you know what, perhaps I can do what? Look at the time it will take. Look at the resources that it will engage. Look at the people that you have to now put in line to have all this sorted out that could very well be doing other things that will benefit this country directly, for which there is lack today.
And not to mention that to make the whole thing of getting on the internet more expensive anyway.
And it is already expensive. And then for people who in other countries they're doing the thing for free, almost free. That's where we should be heading instead of this nonsense. Well, I'm sorry, but that's what it looks like to me at this point. But can we get away from this dragnet of, again, I want to know so that I can plan? No, there are other things that I really do believe. If the issue of the thing is too expensive, absolutely. Take it back, rework it, bring it, and then we can say, members of parliament, have a go at this thing. But are we looking at, again, misplaced priorities when it comes to things that ought to be done?
I don't even think there's a priority. I just think it's misplaced.
Yeah,
Victor?
The bill is just fatally defective on arrival. I mean, you read it and everything screams the unconstitutionality. If you draft a law that is so vague, so broad, and it's already proposing to limit a right. In fact, in the bill itself, it is not acknowledged that it's a bill proposing to limit right to privacy. It's basically fatal on arrival. And the only thing, and if Parliament can heed the advice, is withdraw this bill, have the member rewrite a consumer protection bill in the proper manner that it should.
Then deal
rather
from
than
there.
trying to get this Trojan horse snuck in, and then once it's enacted is when we realize actually everything is actually in the hands of the state. And we have to be conscious that this conversation, this bill is not in isolation. This moment of introduction is not in isolation. Of course, the member says it's been in the works since 2023. But conversations on regulation of social media and the internet have been there for a long time.
Absolutely.
I mean, when we saw the bill in 2019, we have seen KRA's intention in the finance bill last year, this year. the intention is clear.
We need to look another way, that's for sure, definitely. And Victor and Ndede, we want to thank you so much for being here this morning, opening up a lot on this and putting the spotlight. Technology and Human Rights Manager with Amnesty International Kenya has been in the hot seat this morning. Thank you for doing that.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.